A father's worst nightmare turned into something far more horrifying than he could ever imagine. Picture this. You wake up one morning to a call that changes your life forever. Your 10-year-old daughter 𝐿 has gone missing. The world stops spinning as you frantically search, feeling as though you are losing your grip on reality. Every minute that passes feels like an eternity. Every corner you turn, every whisper of hope, eventually fading to nothing. Days go by with no answers. The police search tirelessly, but the truth seems to slip through their fingers, leaving you with more questions than ever before. Then a break. 𝐿's body is found, but the relief you expect never comes. The loss is unbearable, but it's the moment that follows that will haunt you forever. Grief-stricken, yet desperate for answers, Harrison, 𝐿's father, makes a decision that no parent should ever have to consider. He secretly installs a camera inside his daughter's coffin. He tells himself it's a way to find closure, to understand what happened, even though he knows deep down there are things better left unknown. The day comes when he watches the footage. His hand trembles as he presses play. What he saw was nothing like he imagined, nothing like he could have ever prepared for. The footage revealed something far darker than the tragedy of a missing child. This is the chilling story of Harrison and his missing daughter 𝐿. What he discovered that day in the coffin, what was caught on that camera, will make you question everything. What could possibly explain what he witnessed? And how does it fit into the nightmare that has already torn his world apart? Join us as we unravel the mystery of a father's love, loss, and the shocking truths that were buried along with his daughter. Harrison had always been a devoted father, a man who would do anything to protect his daughter 𝐿. His life had always revolved around her, and the love he had for her was as deep as the ocean. The bond between them was unbreakable, or so he thought. 𝐿, a bright, bubbly 10-year-old with an infectious laugh, had filled their home with joy and light. She was curious, adventurous, and always asking questions. Harrison could recall the way her eyes would sparkle whenever she learned something new. She would often tug at his sleeve and ask him if he thought the stars were close enough to touch, or if the world was truly as big as they said it was. To him, those moments were everything. He would give anything to keep her safe and happy, to preserve that sense of wonder that made her so special. Before her disappearance, their life was one of quiet contentment. Their home was warm, filled with memories. Photos scattered throughout their living room captured the essence of a happy family. Harrison and 𝐿, laughing in the park, sitting by the lake at sunset, and 𝐿's school recitals where she shone brighter than any other child. It was a life any parent would envy, and Harrison often found himself grateful for every moment. But the world has a way of turning, and sometimes it turns when we least expect it. One ordinary afternoon, everything changed. 𝐿 was playing in the yard, as she had so many times before. Harrison was working in his office, the house filled with the usual sounds of a typical day. He hadn't noticed the time passing, nor the absence of those little voices and footsteps that were once constant in his life. When he finally stepped outside, calling for 𝐿 to come in for dinner, he found the yard empty. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the grass, but there was no sign of her. His first thought was that she was playing in a corner of the yard, hiding as she often did when she wanted to be the center of a game. But as he called her name, louder this time, his stomach began to tighten. He walked through the house, checked the rooms, even went so far as to check the neighborhood. Nothing. The minutes stretched into hours, and Harrison's heart began to race. He knew something wasn't right. He could feel it deep within him, a sense of dread creeping up his spine. This wasn't a typical child's game of hide and seek. This was different. The police were called, and the search began. They combed through the area, talking to neighbors, reviewing security footage, anything that might lead to even the slightest clue. But nothing. No footprints, no fingerprints, no evidence of any kind. It was as if 𝐿 had simply vanished from the face of the earth. The more Harrison thought about it, the more unsettled he became. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more chilling than the last. Was there someone she knew? Someone who had been waiting for the right moment? The fear that had gripped him was more than just worry. It was a knowing, something in his gut telling him that this was no ordinary disappearance. As the days passed and the search grew colder, Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that there was something much larger at play. The investigation into his daughter's disappearance felt like it was going nowhere, and every step forward seemed to push him 2 steps back. There were no signs of a struggle, no ransom notes, no leads. Harrison had to grapple with the unnerving reality that this could very well be the beginning of a nightmare, and there was nothing he could do to wake up from it. Every day that passed without 𝐬𝐬 brought more questions than answers, and he was left with an unsettling truth. The world was hiding something that had taken his daughter and wasn't going to give her back easily. His gut, that unshakable feeling, kept whispering one thing to him: this wasn't an accident. There was more to the story, a thread that no one had yet discovered. And until that thread was pulled, until the truth came to light, Harrison couldn't stop searching, couldn't stop wondering. He had to find her, no matter the cost. And so began the long, relentless pursuit of answers that would lead him down a path he could never have predicted. It had started as a tragedy, a shocking loss that would forever haunt Harrison's mind. The kind of grief that sears itself into the heart of a parent, leaving behind a scar that never fades. His daughter, 𝐬𝐬, a bright, curious young woman full of life and dreams, was gone, her body found near a lake, lifeless. The authorities ruled it an unfortunate accident, a drowning, nothing more. Yet for Harrison, something didn't sit right. The official explanation, so neatly packaged, felt hollow, as if it didn't fit the picture of his daughter's life, her passion, her boundless energy. She would never have let herself drown, not without a fight. And so he began to question relentlessly, even as his grief threatened to consume him. Days passed. The funeral came and went, but Harrison's mind remained locked in a battle with itself. He had been present when they recovered 𝐬𝐬's body, and something in that moment stayed with him, a memory that seemed insignificant at first. But now it was all he could think about. As the authorities prepared her for identification, Harrison noticed a detail no one else had seemed to observe: a strange, almost deliberate symbol carved into her hand. It wasn't just a mark, it was something more, something ritualistic. The lines, intricate and sharp, seemed almost out of place. How had the police missed it? How could they have overlooked such an obvious clue? The symbol seemed to pulse with meaning, though Harrison couldn't yet decipher it. Every time he closed his eyes, it was there, etched into his mind just as it had been etched into 𝐬𝐬's skin. He asked questions, he sought answers, but the deeper he dug, the less he understood. The police insisted it was an accident. They had their conclusions, and they seemed determined to stick to them. But for Harrison, the weight of uncertainty pressed on his chest, suffocating him, keeping him from accepting the easy explanation. He could see his daughter's face in his mind's eye, her smile, her spark, and it didn't align with the image of someone who had just drowned by accident. Harrison's world had crumbled around him, but the more he explored, the more he uncovered unsettling inconsistencies. The police, in their haste to close the case, had failed to ask the right questions, had failed to look beyond the obvious. Why hadn't they noticed the symbol? Why had they overlooked the peculiarities surrounding the location where 𝐬𝐬's body had been found? Was it truly an accident, or was something more deliberate at play? His heart told him the truth. This wasn't just a case of bad luck or fate. His daughter hadn't died by chance. The symbol on her hand wasn't just an accident either. Someone had done this to her, and they were sending a message, one that Harrison was determined to uncover. He refused to let her death be just another statistic. He couldn't rest, not until he had answers. As Harrison began to piece the puzzle together, each new discovery only deepened the mystery. What had happened to 𝐬𝐬? What had led her to the lake? And who had left that chilling mark, marking her as something more than just a victim of circumstance? The authorities had closed the case, but for Harrison, it was only just beginning. In the dead of night, Harrison sat at his desk, the soft glow of his desk lamp casting shadows across his troubled face. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, unanswered questions, and a creeping sense of unease. Ever since 𝐬𝐬's sudden and mysterious death, something hadn't felt right. The funeral had come and gone, but Harrison's suspicions remained deep, lingering doubts that refused to be silenced. As Harrison continued his investigation, He couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of uncovering a truth so disturbing, so otherworldly, that it could shatter everything he thought was real. The more he learned, the more he began to question not just the death of 𝐸, but everything around him. Had 𝐸 been a victim of something beyond mere human malice? Could this symbol be the thread that tied him to a dark plot? One that extended far beyond what he could ever have imagined? Harrison wasn't sure what was real anymore. The lines between the living and the dead, between the logical and the supernatural, had begun to blur. What had started as a simple investigation into a tragic death was now becoming something much darker. Something that was pushing Harrison to confront not just the truth, but the very nature of reality itself. The moment Harrison came across the footage, everything in his world began to shift. The quiet hum of his ordinary life, the life he once knew, vanished. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been torn, leaving only questions where answers should have been. What was he supposed to do with what he now knew? How could he go back to the way things were when every frame of that footage screamed out for justice, for truth? The footage didn't just show his daughter's last moments, it exposed a story so much bigger, one that was buried beneath layers of lies and silence. Harrison couldn't erase the images from his mind. Each passing second brought him closer to the conclusion that he couldn't walk away from this, not when the truth was so near. The weight of the footage was unbearable, gnawing at him day and night. Every waking moment was consumed by it. But what was he to do? He had already gone to the authorities, pleaded for answers, only to be met with silence, with indifference. The questions he had posed were met with vague responses, dismissed as nothing more than the confused ramblings of a grieving father. They didn't want to listen. So Harrison knew that if he wanted answers, he had to take matters into his own hands. And that was when the decision came. With no help from the police and feeling the unbearable tension growing with each passing day, Harrison knew he could not let the footage remain hidden any longer. The truth had to be known. The world had to see it. The truth was too dangerous, too important to be suppressed. But to reveal it meant risking everything. He could already hear the warnings in his head, whispers from the people who had remained silent, the people who wanted him to stay quiet. But in his heart, he understood there was no turning back. His daughter's death couldn't simply be swept under the rug. There was more at play here, something far larger than he could have ever imagined. Harrison's heart pounded in his chest as he made the call, sharing the footage with the world. The moment he pressed send, a sense of finality washed over him. He wasn't just exposing a mystery, he was opening a door to something far more complicated, and he had no idea what would follow. The consequences of his actions were swift and unforgiving. His life, already shattered by the loss of his daughter, became even more chaotic. The fallout was immediate. News outlets picked up the footage. The story began to unfold across the globe, and with it, the world started questioning everything Harrison had once believed. The calm of his former life was long gone, replaced by relentless scrutiny, dangerous threats, and a flood of questions that he didn't have answers to. Now, it wasn't just his daughter's death that he was dealing with. It was the terrifying realization that everything he had known was connected to something much larger, something darker, something that had been carefully hidden for far too long. Harrison had opened the floodgates, and the truth was out there for all to see. But with that truth came danger, the kind of danger that could swallow him whole and perhaps even destroy what was left of his family. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the small, quiet town. A peaceful, seemingly ordinary night, yet beneath the surface, whispers began to spread. The tragic death of 𝐸 had left the community in shock and disbelief. The official reports suggested it was a horrible accident, but for those paying close attention, there were unsettling details that didn't quite add up. Some claimed that 𝐸's death was no mere accident. There was talk of a cult operating in the shadows of the town, its influence far-reaching, its members hiding in plain sight. The police had found a strange, ritualistic symbol near the scene, an ancient mark, mysterious and unsettling. It was as if it had been deliberately placed, a clue for anyone who knew what to look for. Some said the symbol was the mark of an age-old secret society, whose rituals were far darker than anyone could imagine. Others whispered of a connection to the town's forgotten history, a long-buried legend about rituals performed in the dead of night, meant to offer up something in exchange for unimaginable power. Could it be that 𝐬𝐬 had stumbled into something she shouldn't have? Or was she perhaps chosen to be part of something far more complicated than a simple accident? Then again, there were those who argued that it was all mere speculation. They insisted that the mark was nothing more than a coincidence, that the accident was just that, an accident, pure and simple. 𝐬𝐬 had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and her death was the unfortunate result of a string of unforeseeable events. But still, the question lingered in the air. What if there was something more to this? What if 𝐬𝐬's death was a tragic piece of a much larger, darker puzzle that no one had yet uncovered? Could the symbol, the rumors, and the stories be pointing towards something that no one wanted to admit? What do you think? Could there be a hidden truth behind 𝐬𝐬's death? Or was this simply a tragedy that no one saw coming? Harrison's life was turned upside down by a tragedy that no parent should ever have to experience, the untimely death of his beloved daughter 𝐬𝐬. It wasn't just the loss itself that haunted him. It was the unanswered questions, the strange, unsettling details that surfaced in the aftermath. The kind of details that hinted at something much deeper, something far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. As Harrison began his quest for the truth, he uncovered a series of disturbing revelations. What started as an ordinary investigation into his daughter's death soon led him down a path filled with twists and turns. Each discovery opened a new door, each more confusing and alarming than the last. People who seemed trustworthy turned out to be hiding dark secrets. Clues that once appeared to be unrelated suddenly began to connect in ways that only intensified the mystery. The more Harrison dug, the more he realized that this wasn't just an ordinary case. The truth was buried beneath layers of deception, waiting to be unearthed. And as each piece of the puzzle fell into place, the chilling reality began to emerge. The death of his daughter wasn't a random tragedy. It was part of something much larger, something that had been carefully orchestrated, perhaps even for years. Now Harrison was left with a haunting truth. His daughter's death was only the beginning. What lay ahead was a mystery so deep, so twisted, that it would change everything he thought he knew about the world around him. What do you think happened to 𝐬𝐬? Could there be a hidden truth beneath the surface of her death? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if you're intrigued by stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. There are still so many more chilling tales to uncover, and this one is just the start. As the screen fades to black, a chill runs through the air. The story we followed unfolds into something much deeper, leaving behind an unsettling emptiness, as if the very nature of what was witnessed was not of this world. Every detail, every seemingly innocent moment now feels tainted by the invisible forces at play. The mind races, trying to make sense of what just happened, trying to understand what it all means. But the truth? It's never as clear as it seems. The final frame lingers for a moment, the image almost fading away. But before it does, the eerie echo of a distant sound fills the silence. The faintest creak of a door opening, or perhaps a whisper on the edge of your hearing. It's the kind of sound that makes you look over your shoulder, half expecting to find something standing there in the dark, waiting. The tension heightens, leaving no room for calm. What we have learned is not the full story. What we've seen is only the surface. Somewhere out there, in the quiet corners of our world, the mystery is still unfolding. And now the question lingers, what's next? The truth is never what it seems, and that's where the real story begins.